Hi, I'm Thwesha Khanna, and today I'll be discussing the asbestos contamination that took place in Libby, Montana. The objective of this video is to understand how asbestos contamination took place, to discuss the timeline of events that led to mass mortality and morbidity, to understand the environmental and health consequences, to learn the role of EPA, and to briefly discuss the current status of asbestos in the USA. This video will cover the timeline of events, demographics, role of EPA, asbestos mortality, impact on environment and health. The story traces back to 1919 when Ian Alley acquired the mining claims at Rainy Creek and first started mining vermiculite ore in Libby, Montana. Vermiculite is a naturally occurring mineral with heat-resistant properties. Vermiculite and asbestos form under similar conditions. Libby vermiculite, known commercially as zonolite, was used in a variety of construction materials, including insulation for homes and buildings. In 1963, W.R. Grace bought the zonolite mining operations. When Grace and Company took over operation of the mines it knew the vermiculite was contaminated with a toxic and highly friable form of asbestos called tremolite actinolite series asbestos, often called Libby amphibole asbestos, and that it caused health complications. The company didn't warn anyone about the asbestos exposure, and mining continued until 1990. EPA's investigation determined amphibole asbestos to be present in air, vermiculite insulation, and bulk materials, indoor dust, soil, water, animal, and fish tissue, and various other media. By this time, vermiculite had been mined for more than 40 years, approximately 7 miles outside Libby. The mine closed that year. In 1999, EPA responded to citizen, local government, and media concerns and began to investigate claims that an alarming number of residents were experiencing health problems from exposure to asbestos. In the year 2002, the site was added to the US EPA's National Priorities List and was placed on the Superfund list. In 2009, the agency declared a public health emergency in Libby and called it the worst case of industrial poisoning of a community in US history. A federal court jury acquitted the big chemical products company W.R. Grace and 3 of its former executives on all charges that they had knowingly contaminated the small Montana mining town of Libby with asbestos, then conspired to cover up the deed. Despite knowing the mine's high level of tremolite asbestos dust and its hazardous effects on the lungs, W.R. Grace executives failed to inform their employees. They developed lung problems and several fatalities were reported. During its operation, the mine in Libby was responsible for providing 80% of the country's vermiculite supply and was successfully marketed to homeowners across America. According to Markowitz in 1997, asbestos exposures remained high through the early 1980s, being highest in 1982. Since asbestos diseases have a 20 to 50 year latency period, many people exposed in the 1960s and 70s were showing up in disease or mortality statistics that year. Lung cancer deaths from asbestos were not reported at all at that time, and asbestos was still dramatically underreported even in worker populations where asbestos exposure is well established. Over a period of 22 years, there was a rise in asbestos-related deaths. As the graph shows, there was a significant sudden rise in the number of deaths due to mesothelioma seen in the years 1998 and 1999. In the year 1999, Libby had a total population of approximately 3,000. 13.3% of asbestos-related deaths were documented, and 80% of the residents were diagnosed with asbestos-related diseases. According to a study published in 2016, there were more male decedents than female. It also concludes that the majority of decedents were age 65 or older at the time of death. Cleanup in Libby was the largest, longest-running asbestos cleanup project in American history. It began slowly at first as workers from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency identified the sources of contamination and began an extensive Superfund investigation. They investigated 7,600 properties, cleaned up 2,600 properties, more than 1 million cubic yards of contaminated soil and building materials were removed and replaced, and more than $600 million of federal money was spent during the decontamination efforts. Currently, site cleanup is being addressed through federal, state, and potentially responsible body. These are the 8 operable units by EPA. According to 2019 data, asbestos claims the lives of nearly 40,000 Americans each year. Since the EPA tried to ban asbestos in 1989, more than 1 million Americans have died from preventable asbestos-related diseases. As we know, asbestos naturally forms underground in certain types of rocks usually found near fault zones. Whenever asbestos is released into the environment, it contaminates the air, water, and soil. With asbestos fibers crumbling and breaking up easily, air pollution is a major concern. Upon release, these fibers can potentially remain suspended in the air for hours. Asbestos was also once used to reinforce pipes and drainage systems. These construction materials have contaminated water as a result of their use. Water flow accelerates the degrading of asbestos fibers over time. As mentioned previously, asbestos fibers are naturally found in soil that covers rocks containing asbestos fibers. Asbestos in soil, however, was likely placed there by humans. When asbestos fibers are released into the air by construction, mining, and other activities, they settle in the top layer of the soil and can be blown away by wind and travel great distances. Asbestos exposure in wildlife has similar health effects to asbestos exposure in humans. Primary cause of about 4% of lung cancer cases is asbestos exposure. Around 2% to 10% develop pleural mesothelioma post-exposure. Women are at 75% excess risk of ovarian cancer after asbestos exposure, and it also increases the risk of laryngeal cancer by approximately 40%. To conclude, asbestos poisoning is the nation's longest running and most expensive mass tort litigation. It is a public health problem of epidemic proportions. The Environmental Working Group estimates that 12,000 to 15,000 people die from asbestos-related disease each year. The US EPA considers Libby safe today. Asbestos levels in downtown Libby are now nearly 100,000 times lower than when the mine operated. At this point, EPA does not anticipate further removal actions at OU3 unless they are needed for interim measures. In 2023, EPA will share a proposed cleanup plan for OU3. Thank you for watching.